Oh yeah, it's time to test another limiter. Hey, I'm Adrian from adrianmilea.com, and today I'm going to continue my quest of searching which are the best limiters on the audio market. As a point of reference, I'm going to use the TC Electronics brick wall limiter, the power core version. Why? Because in my opinion, it is one of the best limiters that exists today. And in this episode, I'm going to test the invisible limiter G2 from AOM. And while testing, I will share with you also my opinions. But before we do that, if you want to improve your mixes and masters in less than 10 minutes, go ahead and download your cheat sheet here. While you do that, I'll play some mind-blowing intro. At first glance, the invisible limiter G2 interface is pretty simple, as in the case of other limiters on the audio market. But what you're seeing here is the simplified or the easy version. I'm going to show you the more complex interface in just a minute. So let's start this review by analyzing the limiter's controls or parameters. Here's the gain control with which you can control the gain of the audio material entering the limiter. In other words, with this control plus the ceiling option, you decide how much volume or loudness you need for your final master. The cool part is that, in case you get lost and don't know what a controller does on the plugin, you can hover over the setting and you will have more information on what you can affect with that particular controller or setting. As a secondary help, in case you need precise amounts of gain, you can use this section here to affect different gain amounts. If you want to bypass the limiter, here's where you can do it. Now this is one of the options that I like to have in a limiter, and that is the Unity Gain Monitor. This is very helpful when you truly want to listen and observe how the limiter affects your mix without being distracted by the difference in loudness. Meaning, by using the Unity Gain Monitor option, after you reach the loudness you want, and by bypassing the limiter and activating it, you can hear whether the limiter affects your mix in a good or in a bad way. And from my experience, using different limiters, most of the time limiters affect your mixes in bad ways. But there are still some limiters out there that are doing a great job preserving the quality of your mixes. And this is why I'm doing this kind of reviews, to share with you my opinion on which are the best tools that the audio market has to offer, and maybe discover other tools for myself in this quest. Okay, let's move on. Here we have the ceiling option. With this setting, you set the limiter's threshold, which technically should control the peaks and stop them from reaching the 0 dBs full scale and avoid digital clipping and distortion. I say technically because a lot of limiters have this kind of ceiling parameters that still not limit the peaks and true peaks at 100%. In the quality section, depending on the computer you're using the invisible limiter G2 on, you can control the quality of the limiter. On other limiters, this option is called oversampling. Higher values demand more CPU power. But you should be careful because, as you are advised here, higher values or oversample doesn't necessarily mean better results. So in the end, you should use your ears and decide which setting is better for your particular scenario. The DC cut option is basically a high-pass filter that you can use to cut the low frequencies of your mix before it hits the limiting stage. You can also do this with your favorite EQ or high-pass filter, but if you need this option, it's here for you to use it. In case you need dithering, you have different profiles that you can choose from here. And if you activate the Auto Black option, the dither is automatically muted for very low-level input signal. I'm not sure I ever encountered such option on other limiters I worked with, but it could come handy. So this is the quick overview of the main controls that you can use on the invisible limiter G2. But in case you need more advanced controls, just click here, and you can customize more parameters like the shape mode, the soft knee, and here you can choose whether to link or unlink channels so that they can be processed together or independently. In my mastering sessions, I usually link the left and right channels at 100%. Then here, you can manually control the attack and release of the limiter, but you need to activate them. With the wet mix parameter, you can control the percentage of unprocessed versus processed or limited audio material. When mastering, I usually use the wet mix at 100%, but a great use of this parameter is in case you need some parallel compression. Then, with the sidechain high-pass filter, you can control the cutoff frequency at which the limiter will detect and limit peaks. This is a great option in case you don't want to limit the low end, for example, or maybe you want to use the limiter as a de-easer on some vocals, or maybe tame the highs on some hi-hats and so on. In case you want the limiter to process your audio material in mid-side mode, you can activate the option here. And if you need to inject some fatness into your mix or master, you can do it by activating the bias option. Then here, you can choose between different metering options. And that's pretty much it in terms of the parameters of the invisible limiter G2. And now let's hear how this limiter sounds. For this test, I'll use a song produced and mixed by my brother Vlad. What I expect from this limiter is mainly for it to affect the mix in the most transparent way possible, exactly how my favorite limiter is doing. By the way, my favorite limiter is the break wall limiter, the power core version from TC Electronic. So for this test, I matched the limiters in terms of loudness. On the invisible limiter, I began with the default setting, added some gain and set the ceiling to -1 dBFS, as I usually do in my mastering sessions. So, let's listen. From this part I feel that the invisible limiter G2 is less transparent than the brick wall limiter, even if it limits the mix just 1 to 2 dBs. Let's try another section. That's interesting. Usually at this part, from my previous tests, some other limiters collapse or distort, but the invisible limiter G2 keeps its ground, which is great, but I still feel that some of the transparency of the mix is lost. This is why I'll use the Modern 4 mode, which is supposed to be the most transparent modern mode. So the change did improve a bit the transparency of the mix, but the brick wall is still more transparent. Let's try some oversampling. The oversampling in this case does help, especially when I selected the number 8. Now, let's compare the two limiters again. To my ears, the use of oversampling and the modern mode 4 did improve preserving the transparency of the mix. However, I feel that the invisible limiter causes some sparkle loss at the top end, while the brick wall limiter keeps it intact. Let's try another section. So when there are less elements in the mix, the invisible limiter G2 sounds pretty good. It keeps the stereo image almost intact and also the low end. And now let's try another softer section. Now, you may wonder, why do I test a limiter on a soft section where there's no limiting involved? From my experience, there are limiters out there that affect a lot your mix, even if they don't limit anything. And some of them also affect the mix in unwanted ways, making softer sections louder than they were meant to be compared to overall master. The invisible limiter G2 in this case preserves the separation of the elements of the mix, the stereo image, but compared to the brick wall limiter, the invisible limiter G2 loses some of the top-end sparkle. Hey, by the way, did you subscribe to my channel yet? It would mean a lot. Thanks. And now, let's test the invisible limiter G2 on another song produced and mixed by my brother Vlad. As we'll start with another soft section, try listening to the top end. It seems to me that again the invisible limiter G2 loses some of the mix sparkle and it makes the top end a bit more harsh, while the brick wall limiter keeps the quality of the top end intact. I do like that the invisible limiter in this section keeps the stereo image and the 3D space almost untouched. Let's try a more crowded section. And while we do that, try focusing on the vocals and how they sit in the mix. So in this section we hit about -8.7 laughs, which is pretty loud if you ask me, but I know some of you like things louder than that. However, the invisible limiter G2 does not distort even with so much bass, which is great. And again, I feel that the quality of the top end is lost to some extent in the case of the invisible limiter G2, even with the modern 4 mode. Now let's try the same section, but this time we'll compare the invisible limiter G2 with Pro L2 from FabFilter. On the L2, I started with the default setting, changed the gain, and then selected the transparent mode or style and set a ceiling of -1 dB through peak, with no oversampling. To me, the mix has more freedom when processed by the L2. Also, the quality of the top end is better kept by the Pro L2 even with no oversampling. Okay, and now, while testing the invisible limiter G2, I felt that this limiter has more to offer, and that maybe the quality that I'm searching for lies in the oversampling or the quality parameter. Unfortunately, my MacBook Pro cannot use the invisible limiter G2 at its full oversampling. This is why I set the highest quality and committed or printed this section offline. So let's see once again how the invisible limiter G2 compares to my favorite limiter, but at the highest oversample. Now, that's what I'm talking about. At the best oversampling, the Invisible Limiter G2 sounds pretty good. The sparkle of the mix is almost untouched, and the top end sounds pretty natural. On blind tests, I almost couldn't distinguish the brick wall limiter from the Invisible Limiter G2. However, I still prefer how the brick wall from PowerCore keeps the 3D space of the mix, but also its freedom. So, if you want to use the best quality of the Invisible Limiter, I hope you have a more powerful computer than mine, because I can use it only offline at these settings. There's one more thing that I want to test, and that is how the Invisible Limiter G2 handles the true peaks.
Let's go.
On the brick wall limiter from PowerCore, I set the ceiling to -1 dBFS, and if I play the master, you can see that the true peaks hit exactly -1 dBFS. Now, let's see how the Invisible Limiter G2 handles them. So, we hit about -0.7 dBFS. That means that some of those nasty true peaks go over the -1 dB ceiling we have set up. And by the way, this is a common thing among different limiters. Let me show you on the Pro L2 from FabFilter. So again, I set the ceiling to -1 dBFS, and when I play the master, the true peaks hit about -0.8 dBFS. So, what's the solution? In case you care about true peaks as I do, you can just set up the ceiling until you hit your desired true peak levels. In my case, if I want to hit about -1 dB true peak with the Invisible Limiter G2, I have to set the ceiling to about -1.3 dBFS. And now the true peaks hit the level I want. So there you have it. This is my quick review of the Invisible Limiter G2. In this video, I talked about one of the tools you need to use when mastering a limiter. And that is, of course, depending on the material you're working on. In case you want to learn audio mastering step by step, go ahead and check out my Pro Audio Mastering program, where I'll show you why, how, and when you should do certain things in order to make your production finally sound professional. So, if you're into mastering, check out the description below for more information on the Pro Audio Mastering, and I'll see you on the other side. But wait, we're not done yet. Let's make some conclusions, shall we? The Invisible Limiter G2 has been on my testing list for quite some time, and in this video I shared with you my opinion on this limiter. Luckily, I own the brick wall limiter, the PowerCore version, which helps me a lot in identifying which limiters sound good and which don't. From my tests, in my honest opinion, the Invisible Limiter G2 is one of the best limiters that exist on the audio market. It keeps the 3D space and the stereo image almost untouched. However, also from my tests, if you want to preserve the quality of your mixes at the mastering stage, you need to use the Invisible Limiter G2 at its best quality or oversample. Otherwise, you will lose lots of sparkle at the top end, which is pretty essential if you ask me. In case you already have the Pro L2 from FabFilter, again, in my opinion, you are good to go, because even at no oversampling, Pro L2 beats the Invisible Limiter G2 when set with some oversampling. And this again is only my opinion from my tests. The bottom line is, if you use the Invisible Limiter G2 from AOM, I recommend you to use the best quality or oversample. In the end, I hope this video will help you in your audio production journey. If you found it useful, hit that subscribe button, put in the comments below some of your favorite limiters, and of course, check out other reviews on my channel and spread the word. Help me grow this channel so that I could help as many audio producers as possible. Until next time, stay cool and make great music.